My name's Erica. If you asked me how I started, I'd say with nothing fancy, just a girl from a regular family, with parents who loved me more than anything. My life was pretty standard until I hit college, where I met Jack. He was in the same restaurateur program, and man, did we click. We were both dreamers, aiming to carve out a little empire of our own. Ever think about opening your own place, Erica? Jack asked one night as we were cramming for finals over cheap coffee and day-old donuts. All the time, I admitted, not taking my eyes off the business plan spread across the table. Imagine a cozy little spot, authentic Italian, the kind of place where everyone feels like family. Jack grinned, his eyes lighting up. We could do it, you know. Run it together. What's stopping us? Money, I sighed, a laugh escaping despite the truth of it. Loads and loads of money. But life has a funny way of turning dreams into reality. When my parents passed away suddenly, a brutal car crash that took them too soon, they left me their house and a tidy sum of $400,000. After the grief, the silence of the house was overwhelming. It was Jack who stepped up. Let's do it, Erica. Let's make your dream come true. For you, for them, he said one evening as we sat in the quiet living room, surrounded by memories. Are you sure? I asked, feeling the weight of the decision. It's a huge risk. Jack took my hands in his. I'm in if you're in, all the way. With that, we got married right after graduation and poured every dime and ounce of energy into our first restaurant. I designed the interiors myself, choosing warm yellows and reds, and we both developed the menu, testing recipes until midnight most days. The first few years were tough, no lie. There were nights I fell into bed with my shoes still on, too tired to move. But seeing our dream take shape, watching the 3 restaurants flourish under our care, made every aching muscle worth it. Mom, why are you always at the restaurant? My son, Danny, asked one day. He was about 7, his face serious as only a kid's can be. Because it's our family's place, sweetheart. We built it so we could have a good life, you know? I explained as I tied my apron, preparing for another long shift. But you're always working, he pouted, and it stung because he was right. I know, kiddo. But I promise, we're doing this for us, for our future. One day, you'll see it was worth it, I said, kissing his forehead before rushing out the door, the bell jingling behind me. After years of what seemed like marital bliss and bustling restaurant nights, I started noticing the cracks. Jack and I weren't the dream team we used to be. He was pulling away, distant, like he was always somewhere else even when he was right there. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I was doing the books in the office when Jack walked in, late again, his jacket slung carelessly over one shoulder. Jack, we need to talk about the Henderson event. They want to book the big room, and I can't make that call without you, I said, trying to catch his eye as he rifled through some mail. Yeah, sure, whatever you think is best, he muttered, not looking up. That was his new thing, agreeing without listening. It drove me nuts. Jack, I snapped, louder this time. This is important. Can you please focus? He finally looked at me, his eyes tired, or maybe just uninterested. Erica, I trust your judgment. Just handle it, okay? I've got a lot on my mind. That was another thing. What exactly was on his mind these days? I used to know every thought he had. Now? Not so much. One night, I just couldn't take the guessing games anymore. We were in bed, the only time we ever were in the same room it seemed, and I turned to him, my voice shaky but needing the truth. Jack, is there someone else? The words felt like broken glass coming out of my mouth. He was silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that tells you everything you don't want to hear. Yeah, there is, he said finally, his voice flat. No anger, no sorrow, just cold, hard fact. It just happened. We've changed. I've changed. You've changed. It's not just one thing. The next day was a blur. I moved through the motions at the restaurant, smiling at customers, checking on orders, all while feeling like I was outside my body, looking down at some stranger living my life. When I finally got home, Jack was there, sitting at the kitchen table with that look on his face, the one that used to mean he had something serious to say. "Erica, I think we should talk about what this means for us," he said, as I dropped my keys on the counter, not ready to sit, not ready to hear it. "What's there to talk about, Jack? You've made your choice," I said, my voice cold, steadier than I felt. "We should get a divorce. There's nothing left to salvage." He didn't argue with that. Maybe he wanted to, or maybe he was just as tired as I was. Tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of whatever we had become. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers and dividing up the life we had built together. I kept the house and half of everything else. It was fair, I suppose, but it felt like paying a huge price for a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. That's the thing about building something with someone, it becomes so intertwined that tearing it apart leaves everything looking a bit frayed, a bit worn, a shadow of what it used to be. Starting over is like standing on a cliff edge, the fear of the drop, but also the thrill of the unknown. After Jack, I spent a lot of time figuring things out, getting the restaurants running smooth without him, and just being alone. It wasn't bad, not really. Gave me time to think, to breathe. But then, like a cliché in some corny romance novel, Tom walked into my life, a lawyer with a killer smile that probably won too many cases on charm alone. He came into the restaurant one busy Friday night, his little girl, Emily, in tow. They were hard to miss, she had the same bright laugh as her dad. "A glass of your house red for me, and a lemonade for the little miss," Tom smiled at me, not knowing I owned the place. I was filling in for the hostess that night, just trying to keep busy. Throughout the night, I kept catching glimpses of them from the corner of my eye, him explaining bits of the menu to her, her listening so intently like the world depended on it. It was adorable. Made me miss having that kind of simple interaction, which had become so rare in my life. As they were leaving, Tom stopped by the register where I was cashing out another customer. "Thanks for a wonderful dinner," he said. "The food was excellent, and so was the service." "Glad you enjoyed it," I replied, handing the receipt to the customer before turning to give Tom my full attention. "And your company seemed pretty top-notch too." That was the beginning of everything. Tom started coming around more often, sometimes with Emily, sometimes alone. We'd chat, casual at first, then deeper conversations as the weeks turned into months. He was different, thoughtful, and real. One evening, he closed his menu and leaned back in his chair, watching me as I wiped down the counter. "Erica, would you like to go out sometime? I mean, outside of this place?" I paused, cloth in hand, not sure if I was ready. "Like a date?" "Yeah, a date," he smiled, looking a bit nervous himself. As things started getting serious with Tom, I knew it was time for him to meet my boys, Danny and Sam. I won't lie, I was nervous about how they'd take to him. They'd had a rough time after their dad and I split up, and bringing someone new into our lives felt huge. One Saturday, I decided to throw a small barbecue at our place. Casual, no pressure. Tom came over with Emily, and right off, I could see the boys were sizing him up, a bit standoffish at first, which was expected. Tom, bless his heart, didn't push it. He tossed a football to Danny. "Hey champ, think you can teach me a few tricks?" Danny, a natural athlete, lit up at the chance to show off his skills. "Sure, but only if you can keep up," he shot back with a grin. Sam, quieter and more into his books, hung back a bit. Tom noticed and wandered over to him later with a comic book in hand. "Heard you're the expert on these. Think you could explain the multiverse theory to me?" "It's way over my head." Sam's eyes, usually glued to his tablet, looked up, surprised and a bit impressed. Sure, I can do that." Watching them talk, seeing Tom genuinely interested in what Sam had to say, it eased my heart. And Emily, she was a gem, trying to include Sam in the conversation, showing off her own collection of superhero stickers. Just when I thought I had left all the drama behind and could finally get some peace with Tom and the kids, my past came knocking, or rather, ringing, on my day off. I was in the middle of making lunch when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Jack. My heart sank a bit, not ready to hear whatever he had to say. "Erica, you're not going to believe this, but I'm suing you," Jack's voice chirped through the speaker, too cheerful for the words he was spitting out. "You got more than your fair share in the divorce, and I've been talking to some very good lawyers. My new father-in-law's picking up the tab. We're going to make sure I get what I deserve, which is a lot more than what I walked away with." My head was spinning. "You've got to be kidding me. We split everything fair and square. You agreed to it." "Yeah, well, I've changed my mind. You don't deserve the good life, Erica. Not after how boring and ugly you turned out. I'm going to make sure you pay for it," he sneered, and I could almost see the smug look on his face. I couldn't hold back the tears. They started to fall, hot and fast, as the shock turned to anger, then hurt. Tom walked in right then, his face clouding over when he saw me. "Babe, what's wrong? Who was that on the phone?" "It was Jack. He's suing me. Says he didn't get enough from the divorce and now wants to ruin me," I managed to get out between sobs. A couple of weeks later, the nightmare continued when I bumped into Jack and his new wife, Lara, at the school parking lot. I was there to pick up the boys, and there they were, leaning against their car, looking like they owned the place. Lara spotted me first and smirked. "Look who it is. If it isn't the sad little ex-wife. Not taking very good care of yourself, are you, Erica? Don't worry, Tom will be out the door soon enough, just like Jack was." I felt my face flush with anger. "Watch your mouth, Lara. You know nothing about my life." Jack chuckled, joining in. "Oh, but we do, Erica. We know enough to see you're failing miserably. Maybe it's time someone else took over raising your kids. You're clearly not up to the task." "That's enough, Jack," I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. The few parents milling about turned to look. "You should be ashamed, talking like this in front of your own children." They walked away, leaving me there, fuming and humiliated. The drive back was quiet, my mind racing a mile a minute. How had my life come to this? Being threatened by my ex, insulted in front of my kids. But as we drove, my resolve hardened. Jack wanted a fight? He'd get one. Tom was already home when we arrived, and he could see the fire in my eyes as I walked through the door. "Babe, you okay? You look like you're ready to go to war," he said, a worried look crossing his face as he came over to help with the boys. "I am. I want to hire a private investigator," I said without preamble, dropping my keys on the counter with a clatter. "Jack's up to something, and I want to know what it is." The next day, Tom set up a meeting with the investigator, a grizzled guy named Mike, who had seen more shady dealings than a street corner in a noir film. We laid out everything, and Mike nodded, scribbling notes in a worn leather notebook. It didn't take long for Mike to get back to us. The news he brought wasn't just good, it was golden. Jack hadn't changed one bit, still the same cheater he always was, but this time he was playing around with a stripper. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I forwarded the evidence to Lara, adding just a note. "Thought you should know what your perfect husband is up to." The response was quicker than I expected. Lara called me, her voice choked with tears and something else, shame, maybe? "Erica, I'm so sorry," she stammered out between sobs. "I had no idea. I was so horrible to you, and now, Jack." "Lara, stop. It's not your fault he's a jerk," I found myself saying, the anger softening as I listened to her cry. "Look, I understand more than anyone what it's like to be lied to by that man." There was a heavy pause, and then Lara sniffled loudly. Can I help? I mean, I want to make this right. Not just for me, but for you too, Erica." I was taken aback. This was the last thing I expected. "Let's meet. We can talk about it." "Thank you, Erica. Really, thank you," she said, her voice cracking again. As I hung up the phone, a mix of emotions swirled through me. I had started this to protect myself and hit back at Jack, but now it felt like something more. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about setting things right. Somehow, against all odds, Lara and I were on the same side now. This battle had just taken a very unexpected turn. Sitting in the little cafe with the red awning, waiting for Lara, felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she was an enemy, laughing at me alongside Jack. Now, she could be an unexpected ally. The bell above the door jingled, snapping me out of my thoughts as Lara walked in, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Her walk was determined as she slid into the booth across from me, clutching a bulky folder. "Erica, thank you for meeting me," she started, her voice shaky but sincere. I nodded, straight to the point. "What do you have for me, Lara?" Without a word, she pushed the folder across the table. "Everything you need to know about Jack's recent activities." I opened the folder, scanning the documents rapidly. My heart sank with each page. There were emails and texts between Jack and several of my top employees, offering them double their current pay to jump ship and join a new venture he was planning. "This is just the beginning," Lara said. "He's been spreading rumors about your restaurants. Claims of unsanitary conditions, poor service, even paid people to write bad reviews online." The world seemed to spin a little. "And the lawsuits?" "He's gearing up to claim you've hidden profits, that you cheated him out of his rightful share during the divorce," she added, her eyes darkening. I leaned back, absorbing the blow. This was worse than I thought. Jack was playing dirty, trying to take everything I'd worked so hard to build. "Does he know you're doing this?" I asked, eyeing her carefully. Lara shook her head vigorously. "No, and he can't know. Not yet. I can't believe I was so blind. Just beat him, Erica. Show him he can't push us around." I took the documents home and showed them to Tom, who read through them with a furrowed brow. "We've got him," Tom said confidently after a long silence. "With this evidence, we can not only defend against his claims, but go on the offensive. He won't know what hit him." Buoyed by Tom's confidence, I knew what I had to do next. The following day, I called a meeting with all my staff at the main restaurant. The air was tense as everyone gathered, whispering about the urgent summon. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm sure you've heard rumors lately, bad reviews, talks of unsanitary conditions. It's all a targeted attack on us, by my ex-husband Jack." The room was silent for a moment before Marco, now my head chef, stood up. "We're with you, Erica. We know the truth. We see how hard you work, how much you care. Jack's got nothing on you." Nods and murmurs of agreement followed, the team's solidarity palpable. "Thank you," I said, feeling a surge of relief and determination. "And I want to take this a step further. Starting today, we're installing live cameras in the kitchens. Let our customers see the truth for themselves." The announcement was met with applause, the team rallied by the proactive approach. I didn't stop there. I took to social media, posting a video explaining the situation. "Come see for yourself," I invited our customers. "Take a tour, watch our chefs at work. We have nothing to hide." The response was overwhelming. Bookings for kitchen tours came flooding in, and the community support was incredible. Our reservations spiked, people eager to stand with us against the underhanded tactics, trying to undermine our integrity. A week later, Jack called me and offered to discuss our differences. The meeting was set in one of those upscale places that Jack always liked, the kind where they charge you $10 just to breathe their air. As soon as we were all seated, Jack wasted no time. "Erica, I'm willing to be generous here," he started, his voice oozing false charm. "I'm ready to forgive you for all the trouble you've caused, and all I'm asking in return is a couple of your restaurants and, let's say, a small compensation of $1 million. I stared at him, stunned by his audacity. Then, the absurdity of his demand hit me, and I couldn't help but burst out laughing. "You're joking, right? Please tell me this is a joke." "I'm dead serious, Erica. It's more than fair, considering the circumstances," Jack sneered, looking at Lara. "Tell them, honey. Tell them your dad's backing us up." Lara's expression was unreadable at first, then she turned to Jack, her voice calm but cold enough to chill the wine. Actually, Jack, there's been a change of plans. Jack blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Lara stood up, her chair scraping back sharply. She reached into her purse, pulling out a stack of papers. I'm talking about this, Jack. She threw the papers on the table, they scattered slightly, the word divorce visible on the top sheet. Jack's face went white as he picked up the papers, his hands trembling. Lara, what, why? Because I know about your affairs, all of them. Your sweet stripper was the final straw. Lara's voice broke slightly, but she quickly composed herself. And my father, he's indeed getting his lawyers involved, but not to help you. They'll be representing me in the divorce and suing you for everything you've done. She turned to me, her eyes softer. Erica, I should have believed you from the start. I'm so sorry for everything. I reached out, squeezing her hand briefly. It's okay, Lara. We both fell for his lies. But it's over now. Lara nodded, pulling her hand back and taking a deep breath. It is. She looked back at Jack, who was now slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Goodbye, Jack. With that, Lara walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. The silence that followed was heavy. Jack finally looked up, his eyes red. Erica, please, I can change. Don't let her do this. Don't let her ruin me. Tom's laugh was harsh, echoing slightly in the suddenly too quiet restaurant. You did that all on your own, Jack. Erica has nothing to do with it. And as for that lawsuit you were so eager about, expect one from us for defamation. And trust me, we have more than enough to bury you. We stood up, ready to leave this mess behind. Jack remained seated, a broken figure who'd finally run out of moves. The courtroom was hushed as Tom and I waited for the judge to deliver the final verdict. My hands were clammy, clasped tightly together in my lap, while Tom, ever the rock, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. The judge looked over the rim of his glasses, his voice steady and clear. In the matter of the defamation and damage to reputation brought by Ms. Erica against Mr. Jack, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Erica. It is ordered that Mr. Jack pay a sum of $500,000 in damages. A gasp went through the courtroom, mostly from Jack's side, but the sound was music to my ears. Tom leaned over, his whisper just for me. We did it, babe. You stood your ground, and you won. I could hardly believe it. After everything Jack had put me through, justice was finally served. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, not of sorrow, but of relief, of closure. But our legal victories didn't end there. Lara, true to her word, had gone after Jack with everything she had. Her father's lawyers were relentless, and Jack was ordered to pay a massive settlement for his infidelity and the emotional distress he caused. In the aftermath, Jack's restaurant empire began to falter. Saddled with debt and a tarnished reputation, he couldn't keep up. When his main restaurant came up for sale, Tom nudged me gently. You should buy it, turn it into something good. And I did. I purchased his restaurant at a fraction of its worth. One afternoon, as I surveyed my new property, Lara walked in. Since the trial, we'd found solace in our shared struggles and had become unlikely friends. Looks different when it's empty, doesn't it? She remarked, her voice echoing slightly in the vacant space. It does. But it won't be for long. I'm thinking of turning this place into a family-friendly venue, something the community can really enjoy. I shared, excited about the possibilities. We walked through the empty restaurant, planning and dreaming about what it could become. Lara, now free from Jack's shadow, was thinking about starting her own business, perhaps something in interior design. You've got an eye for it, I encouraged her. You helped me see the potential in this old place. As we stood there, talking about the future, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battles were over, the past finally put to rest. I had my family, my friends, and a future that looked brighter than it had in years. You know, I never thought we'd end up here, Lara said, gesturing around us. Me neither, I laughed. But I'm glad we did. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? As we left the building, the sun was setting, casting long shadows and bathing the street in golden light. I took a deep breath, feeling truly free for the first time in years. The road hadn't been easy, but it led me here, to this moment, this feeling of complete and utter freedom.
Here, this is for you, Mom. Emma said so, but then in the next moment, she flipped the stew onto the floor. What? It was the first time my son, Michael's family had come over to our house. I was preparing dinner with Stella, my daughter-in-law, and Emma, my 3-year-old granddaughter. But then Emma, instead of placing the stew at Stella's seat, deliberately spilled it on the floor. It wasn't because she tripped or slipped. She clearly did it on purpose. Wasting food like that. Why would you do something like this? I couldn't help but scold Emma harshly. Because I thought it was easier for Mom to eat. Startled by being scolded, Emma said, crying and shaken. Easier to eat? I couldn't believe Emma's words and unconsciously repeated them. Mom always eats on the floor. What do you mean? Sobbing, Emma tried to explain. Hearing Emma's surreal words, I looked at Stella to question her. Seeing Stella with a pale face and her shoulders shrunken, I felt she was hiding something. Good morning. Today, as always, while looking at the portrait of my deceased husband, I greeted. I have been living alone since my husband Ian passed away a few years ago. The expression on Ian's face in the portrait is grumpy, with a deep furrow between his brows. Thinking back, I hardly ever saw him smile during his lifetime. Our marriage was arranged, and from the beginning, we were careful with each other. We barely spoke, each of us strictly keeping to our roles. A happy marriage seemed far from achievable, and we never went out together even on holidays. At that time, I didn't have friends to call my own, and of course, it was a time when there were no mobile phones, so I came to think that's just what marriage was. Ian would lock himself in his room or go out alone on weekends, coming back late at night. And sometimes we wouldn't even talk at home, always an icy atmosphere prevailing. Yet, my in-laws were persistent in wanting to see a grandchild. Suspecting illness due to the lack of childbirth news, they urged me to go to the hospital repeatedly. Ian, for his part, seemed annoyed being nagged, shared the bedroom with me just for one night. Luckily, I became pregnant and decided to pour all my love into raising the child. Ian showed no interest even as my belly grew, mercilessly assigning me household chores even when I was immobilized by morning sickness and wasn't even there for the birth of our child. When I was too exhausted and asked Ian for help, he dismissed me by saying he was busy. However, when our son Michael was born, Ian changed as if he were a different person and actively involved himself in parenting. For the first time, Ian suggested we go shopping together with Michael. What kind of picture books should we read to Michael? I couldn't hide my joy and spoke to Ian more than usual. Wouldn't this outfit look nice on him? Contrary to my excitement, Ian still had an angry look. He hardly responded and dismissed all my choices with a sigh and told me that he would decide everything. I wanted us to cooperate in parenting, but Ian rejected everything I tried to do or say. Only a man can understand what a boy needs. And eventually, even when feeding Michael, he said he wanted to focus on the meal, so he moved to a separate room. Ian was quite strict about everything from how to hold a fork and a knife and to the order of eating. It took 6 months before Ian approved of Michael's eating manners and allowed him to eat with me. The first time I saw Michael eat, I was astonished by how neatly he did it. He never complained or showed weakness, focusing solely on his studies and not playing with friends. Michael, well done. Why don't you take a break sometimes? I tried to comfort Michael with some cake as a snack while Ian was away. Sweets aren't good for the body. He refused without even glancing my way. As Michael entered high school, he joined the baseball team, wanting to train his spirit, and became a star pitcher of the team. Even after that, thanks to his disciplined effort, he tackled everything with all his might and graduated top of his class from a prestigious university known for its difficulty. Raised by the strict Ian, Michael grew up to be so graceful in his movements that people passing by on the streets would stop and stare. It seems he was even approached by several women for dates. I once saw Michael sighing to himself. "Michael, isn't there someone you're interested in? I find it more meaningful to spend my time honing myself, rather than romance." His response to my casual question was marked by an even deeper sigh. Eventually, Michael made neither friends nor lovers, always a lone wolf, establishing himself as an object of admiration from afar. After university, he landed a job at a major publishing company, enviable to many. The publishing company kept him busy, and Michael lived a life of constant business trips, hardly ever returning home. He woke up early every morning and returned home on the last train. With such a lifestyle, he had no chance for encounters, dedicating his days to work alone. Even the formidable Ian would be asleep by the time Michael came home, so I secretly prepared snacks for him. A man's body is his capital. Ian had always fed Michael a perfect meal of one soup and one dish, and so he was forbidden snacks, especially midnight snacks. However, no matter how balanced the diet, it was clear that the hard-working Michael was gradually losing weight due to insufficient nutrition. He's going to collapse if he keeps this up. Michael initially refused the midnight snack, wanting to go to bed early. But one day, after exchanging such words several times, Michael's stomach growled loudly, cutting off his words. "The stew is ready." I said, "I want to go to sleep." "See, the stomach doesn't lie," I gently told Michael, who turned bright red and looked down. "Is it really okay for me to eat?" "Of course. I made it for that reason." "Thank you." With a slightly trembling voice, Michael carefully brought the spoon to his mouth. Then, with his spoon in his mouth, Michael froze. "Michael, what's wrong?" "It's delicious." It seemed the taste was shockingly good for Michael. He devoured the steaming stew, even asking for seconds. After finishing 3 plates, Michael showed a smile I had never seen before. "Ah, this is the best feeling. I didn't know there was something this delicious. You've worked hard every day. I'll prepare a snack for you tomorrow night too." From that day on, Michael began to eat the midnight snacks I prepared with curiosity. Thanks to that, Michael's weight returned to normal, unbeknownst to Ian. The time for midnight snacks, the only time Michael and I spent together, became the time I also looked forward to as well. "Mom, what's for tonight's snack?" "Tonight, it's ramen." "Ramen? I've been wanting to try that." For Michael, who had never eaten out, the midnight snacks I made were all first-time experiences. Every time, Michael would light up like a child and eagerly eat up the meal. And so, seeing Michael off to work in the morning as usual became part of my daily routine. Michael, having regained his health, made significant progress at work, becoming regarded as the star in the company. This led to a series of invitations from women, it seems. Seeing this, Ian, perhaps unable to stand it, recommended an arranged marriage, and quickly, the discussions concluded, and Michael ended up getting married without any prior dating experience. Michael married Stella, a woman who worked as a secretary to the president of a famous company. Though she was of a quiet demeanor, she appeared to be a polite, serious person. "I am inexperienced, so I ask for your kindness." At our first meeting during the introduction, Stella greeted us politely, a rarity these days. "I will do my best to be a good wife and support Michael." Stella smiled softly, narrowing her beautiful eyes, and I thought she looked as beautiful as a blossoming flower. "We're going to be family, so don't hesitate to rely on us for anything." Happy as if I had gained a daughter, I exchanged contact information with Stella and told her so. Stella, coming from a family that lived a bit far away, nodded happily to my words. "Thank you very much. It's very reassuring." Then, the newlyweds moved to the neighboring town. Anticipating they might have a lot of unfamiliar things to deal with in their new life, I decided to frequently send messages via mobile phone. However, when I asked if they needed any help, Stella, who was already domestic and skilled in household chores, seemed to have quickly won over Michael's heart. It appeared Michael often had to go on business trips due to work, but they seemed to get along well, going shopping together on holidays. Not only that, but Stella also took care of me by giving me candies when I had a sore throat or recommending a good plaster when I mentioned I had hurt my back, always considerate towards me. She would quickly reply to my messages, so I thought there was no need to worry. When I told Ian about Michael and Stella, he nodded as if to say, of course, making me completely at ease. I'm happy to see them so happy. Michael and Stella were blessed with a daughter named Emma in their 4th year of marriage, bringing me great joy. And I think even Ian softened a bit. However, life doesn't always continue happily. Before Emma turned 2, my Ian suddenly collapsed. Ian, who had lived a life rarely seen smiling, seemed to have been unknowingly harboring stress. By the time he was advised to be hospitalized, it was too late, and cancer had spread throughout his body. And so, Ian passed away, leaving us behind. After the funeral, as I started living alone, messages from Stella, which used to come frequently, gradually became scarce. Even when I offered to help with childcare, I was gently refused, not wanting me to go through the trouble. It started after Ian's funeral. Stella suddenly began acting strangely, and when I inquired about Emma or their life, her responses were curt, and sometimes there was no reply at all. She wouldn't answer phone calls, and I worried every day. Feeling the distance between Stella, Emma, and myself, time passed, and before I knew it, Emma was 3. Thinking at least for Emma's 3rd birthday, I decided to send a message about having a meal at my house. Happy 3rd birthday to Emma! Have you gotten used to parenting? Yes, thank you. It's been a while since we've seen each other. How about a meal at my place? No, thank you. Stella's cold reply made me sigh. I haven't had much to look forward to since I became alone. I want to celebrate my first grandchild's 3rd birthday. After sending such a message, perhaps my feelings got through, as she curtly replied, all right, we'll go. I had doubts about Stella's sudden consent, but the joy of meeting Emma soon dispelled them. And finally, the day of the family meal arrived. Stella, it's been a while. I greeted Stella and her somewhat tense family with a smile. Sierra, it's been a while. Thank you for inviting us today. Wondering if they were nervous after such a long time, I let them into my house. Come on, Emma, say hello to Grandma. Emma, who had been shyly hiding behind Stella, came forward quietly when encouraged and bowed politely. Grandma, hello. Contrary to Stella's uneasy and somber demeanor, Emma greeted me with a bright smile. Emma, hello. I made stew today, let's eat together. Yay! I love stew. It was the first time I had seen Emma since she was just a baby. I was worried she might be shy, but Emma's cheerful and innocent demeanor lifted some of my anxiety. However, Stella, hunched over and unusually vigilant, was not the Stella I knew. She used to be considerate and attentive to her surroundings. While I was concerned about Stella, I decided to wait and see, understanding she might have things she didn't want to talk about. Where's Michael? Stella, looking unsettled, scanned the inside of the house. Oh, Michael will be coming directly from his business trip, so he'll be late. I received a message. Stella, you didn't know? That's right. I'm sorry, I might have missed the message. Stella seemed relieved for a moment and hastily checked her mobile phone as if to hide her expression. I'm sorry, I had a message too. I can't believe I missed it. I feel like a failure as a wife. Stella's blue face and the way she berated herself seemed excessive to me. The message had just come in, so there was no need to worry so much. However, I didn't press further in front of Emma. It's not your fault, it's okay. Sit down, and I'll reheat the stew. Sorry. Her voice was so low I had to ask again. Stella, did you say something? Nothing, it's nothing. Stella seemed even more withdrawn, making me feel she was hiding something from me. It was just a hunch, but these intuitions often prove correct. I'll help you carry it. Emma ran over with an innocent smile, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Oh, thank you. But stay back from the stove, it's dangerous." Emma's offer to help was impressively mature for a 3-year-old. Stella, meanwhile, sat down hesitantly and stared solemnly at her spoon. "Here you go, be careful, it's hot." "Okay." Emma energetically took her plate and slowly walked over to Stella. And then, "Here, this is for you, Mom," Emma said, and in the next moment, did something unbelievable. "What?" Emma deliberately spilled the stew on the floor instead of placing it at Stella's seat. It wasn't because she tripped or slipped. She clearly did it on purpose. "Why would you do something like this? Wasting food." I couldn't help but scold Emma harshly. "Because it's easier for Mom to eat." Surprised by the scolding, Emma said, crying and shaken. "Easier to eat?" I couldn't believe Emma's words and repeated them unconsciously. "Mom always eats on the floor." "Eating on the floor? What do you mean?" "Mom always eats on the floor because Dad makes her." Emma tried to explain, sobbing. Hearing Emma's surreal words, I looked at Stella, who was trembling and pale. "Stella, what's going on?" "Ah." Just as Stella was about to speak, the doorbell rang, and Michael appeared at the entrance. Despite the awkward timing, I quickly cleaned up the spilled stew and welcomed Michael in. "I'm home." "Did something happen?" Michael seemed puzzled by the delay between the doorbell and the door opening. "Welcome back. I couldn't leave the stove." I tried to act normally, hiding my agitation. "I see, is that stew I smell?" "Yes, your favorite stew." I felt relieved I had made stew and breathed a sigh of relief. Unaware of anything, Michael cheerfully entered the living room, ignoring Stella's distress, and sat down with a thud. "Nothing beats Mom's stew." Michael spoke loudly while Stella bit her lip tightly. Feeling the tense atmosphere between them, I forced a smile, struggling to maintain a facade. I was skeptical about Michael making her eat on the floor, but I sensed their relationship wasn't good. The conversation remained superficial, the stew tasted bland, but somehow, the meal ended peacefully. After the Michael family left, I messaged Stella about the incident. The only reply I got was, "It's nothing." "It can't be nothing," I murmured quietly to the mobile phone screen, reflecting on our interactions. "Stella's messages have been cold lately." The distant replies didn't seem like they were coming from the caring Stella I knew. Thinking about the incident made me wonder if Michael was controlling her phone. I can't overlook what just happened. I need to check on things myself. With that thought, I decided to visit Michael's house. Even though it's spring, it was already dusk. I shivered in the cold air as I approached their house. Just then, I heard a loud argument. "It's your fault." "What?" That was Michael's voice. Panicked, I pressed the doorbell. Michael, with a forced smile, greeted me. "Mom, we just said goodbye, what brings you back?" "I need to talk to Stella." "What?" "Well, Stella's tired from the visit, I'll pass the message." Michael blocked my way, visibly flustered. "This is an important matter between women." My firm tone left Michael with no choice but to let me in. "Stella?" Looking around inside, I noticed the bathroom light was on. "I'm going in." As I headed to the bathroom, Michael hurried after me, panicking. "Stella's in there, you can't go in now." But I entered the bathroom before Michael could stop me. And what I saw was unexpected. "Stella!" Stella was in the shower, drenched, sitting on the floor. "Sierra." I was cleaning the shower and accidentally turned it on myself. Stella weakly smiled as she spoke to me. "This is terrible, you'll catch a cold." After finding a towel, I wrapped Stella in it, drying her hair and arms. "I can't believe this." "Sorry, Mom, Stella always messes up when I'm not watching." Michael didn't even attempt to get a towel, instead crossing his arms with an angry look. Stella was in a daze, quietly letting me help her. Seeing Stella's slight shivers, I couldn't deny Emma's words were true. "Stella, I've dried you off somewhat, but you need to change immediately. Sierra, I'm sorry. Thank you. Always like this. Stella can't do anything without me. Michael complained, but Stella's fear was evident. Pretending to use the bathroom, I discreetly called the police, and soon the doorbell rang, signaling their arrival. Who's that? Michael answered reluctantly. We've received complaints about loud noises from this house. The officer said, to which Michael lied about a misunderstanding. The officer insisted on speaking with us after checking the neighborhood. Today's a bad day. Scratching his head, Michael opened the door. 3 officers entered swiftly, one securing Stella and Emma while the others restrained Michael. What? Michael resisted desperately, but the officers were unfazed. What the hell? What did I do? He knew he couldn't fight off the police, but he still tried to make himself loose. To that the police said in a low voice, "If you don't calm down, you're obstructing the execution of our duties." Michael turned pale and suddenly became quiet. Meanwhile, Stella, overwhelmed by the sudden events, saw the subdued Michael and burst into tears. Looking at me and the officers, she spoke quietly. I can't take it anymore. Stella revealed her pent-up frustrations. As soon as we got married, he submitted my resignation without my consent. I protested to the CEO, but no one believed me. Rumors had spread that Stella complained about her low salary and was unhappy with the CEO, none of which were true. Ultimately, her resignation was accepted despite her objections. Life became hell after I became a housewife. First, her mobile phone was taken away. In her unfamiliar married life, it seems Stella had many things she wanted to discuss with me or her parents, but Michael wouldn't listen. Especially about meals. Whatever I cooked was always criticized as bad. I wanted to ask Sierra for recipes, but was told to figure it out on my own. At first, it was just verbal criticisms, so Stella thought she could bear it. Things got worse when Emma was born. He did help with childcare, but Michael appeared to be a kind and good father to Emma, but his verbal abuse towards Stella in her presence increased. After Ian passed, the harassment intensified. Verbal abuse became a routine. Stella was ordered to eat meals on the floor and endured days of being overworked by Michael. When they went shopping, she was only allowed to buy what Michael specified, limiting her outings to the bare essentials. Any slight dissatisfaction from Michael, like a lightly cleaned area or a wrinkled shirt, resulted in Stella being doused with cold shower. Using water as a means of harassment left no physical marks. I had no one to turn to, it was so hard. Tears fell again from Stella's eyes. She confirmed my suspicions of her suffering under Michael's harassment. You've been enduring all alone. It must have been so hard. I regretted not noticing the signs earlier. As I comforted Stella, I reflected on my actions. Michael faced interrogation after everything was revealed. During the interrogation, Michael sat arrogantly, denying any wrongdoing. An officer, unable to overlook Michael's behavior, pressed him hard. Why Stella acted fearfully around Michael, and the reason Emma naturally spilled the stew on the floor were questioned. Even without visible marks, harassment traces could be investigated with modern medical technology, the officer sternly stated. Finally cornered, Michael confessed. I've been under a lot of stress. Michael murmured as if speaking to himself. He resented the strict discipline enforced by his father since childhood. He was strictly told about the order of the meal he ate and the right size he was supposed to eat in one bite. You can't even do this. Harsh scoldings for minor mistakes were part of his upbringing. Forced to learn kanji and English at a young age, Michael was made to revise tirelessly for any mistakes. In elementary school, while peers enjoyed games, Michael was sent to unwanted lessons and cram schools. He revealed his dissatisfaction with all of it. In high school, he was forced into a strict baseball team, despite having no interest. The first time I played soccer during a break, I found it incredibly fun, but my father never allowed me to switch to the soccer team. I was shocked by Michael's words. I trusted Ian to take care of meals in another room, never questioning it, and rejoiced at Michael's academic and extracurricular diligence. All the times you were working so hard, it wasn't because you enjoyed those activities. I didn't know Michael loved soccer, and I was unaware of his interactions with Ian. I was just preparing lunches every day without knowing anything about my family. I had no idea you felt that way, Michael. It's natural for you not to know. He said it was a man's promise and made me keep quiet. Michael, adeptly trained mentally, easily maintained composure without my knowledge. He didn't enjoy studying either. He was restricted from popular student activities like gaming and fashion interests. And even his love for sweets was limited. Ultimately, an arranged marriage decided by Ian added to his growing resentment. Having the marriage arranged without his consent, Michael seemed to have started feeling indifferent about everything. Even after getting married and moving away, the pressure of being married to someone chosen by Dad made him feel monitored, and the curse lifted only after Dad's death. I became obsessed with the idea that Stella should strive just like me. That was how Michael concluded. I thought I had raised Michael together with Ian. I had no inkling Michael was enduring such hardship behind my back. The guilt and powerlessness overwhelmed me. Despite Michael and Ian keeping silent, I bear responsibility for not noticing. Stella, this isn't something an apology can fix, but it was my fault for raising him poorly. I'm truly sorry. No. I'm the one who should apologize for not being able to heal Michael's heart. Stella's words, ever so kind, made tears spill from my eyes. Stella, you've done nothing wrong. I'm truly sorry for everything. Afterward, Michael was arrested for assault. Having shared his burdens, he seemed somewhat relieved. He will now have time to reflect and make amends. Stella decided to divorce Michael, taking Emma back to her parents' home. Sierra, thank you for everything. I haven't done anything worthy of your thanks. I decided to support Stella and Emma financially in Michael's stead. Initially hesitant, Stella accepted after I expressed a desire to maintain a good relationship. I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I'll always consider you as my family. Thank you. Having a relationship with you and Emma is a great comfort to me. Stella, having settled into her new life, seemed to regain her bright smile. I regularly received photos of Stella and Emma. She also invites me several times a year to visit Emma. Sierra, would you like to come over sometime? Emma misses you. Seasons have cycled through peaceful days since the incident. Emma started going to elementary school and even visited my house alone. Exactly, Emma, you're doing great. I was teaching Emma how to make hamburgers during one of her visits. Grandma, this is fun. Emma showed a carefree smile, shaping the hamburgers perfectly. Indeed, it's fun. It'd be nice if Mom could join us next time. Yeah. I'll make a lot. I deeply cherished these moments of happiness. Relieved that Michael hadn't inflicted lasting wounds on Emma, I wished for her to always be smiling. As we placed her small hamburgers in the pan, her eyes sparkled with anticipation for the completion of the meal. May your life be filled with smiles from now on. I whispered, as if making a vow.
I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, got our own place, pay our bills, and live a life that's ours. It's been a year since we said I do, and honestly, life's been good, except for one little thing: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I never expected to be the daughter-in-law in shining armor, but I also didn't expect to be the family's unwanted guest. The day I met my in-laws, it felt like walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to my neck. My mother-in-law, Jane, had this way of looking at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was more of a nuisance or just plain boring. I could tell she had sized me up and found me lacking before I even had a chance to say hello. Alex had warned me about his mom. She can be a bit much, he said, as we drove to their place that first time. But don't take it to heart, okay? I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. At dinner, I was passing the salt when Jane said, "You know, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey?" She said to Alex, who just nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I remember," he replied, not looking at me. I sat there, salt shaker in hand, feeling like I was invisible. They all talked about Stephanie as if I wasn't there. I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down with a smile. "Sounds like she was a great cook," I said, trying to seem unaffected. Jane's eyes met mine, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, she was. She was a lot of things." That night, I told Alex how I felt. "It's like she's measuring me against some ghost." Alex hugged me close. "You're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, but as I'd learned, Jane had a long game in mind, and I was the pawn she was eager to sacrifice. I just didn't know it yet. Living with an allergy isn't just inconvenient, it's like having a shadow that's constantly whispering danger in your ear. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my arch nemesis. It started with a spoonful of peanut paste and a trip to the emergency room that left my parents with a crystal clear message. Keep her away from peanuts and a whole host of other foods if you want her to grow up. It's not just peanuts, though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes, they're all off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends hesitate to invite me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow manages to question every single time we're over for dinner. "Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It's got almond extract," she'd ask, with a tone that hovered between concern and disbelief. I would smile politely, though I'd rather not, and say, "Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, though." It was the same dance every time. I remember once, at a family gathering, I was navigating the buffet, a mental checklist running through my head. Alex was by my side, plate in hand, trying to help me find something safe to eat. That's when Jane swooped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Liz, you must try this casserole. I made sure it was Liz-friendly," she announced, but the glint in her eye didn't match her nurturing words. Alex paused, his fork mid-air. "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" he asked, knowing full well that many brands included soy, a big no-no for me. Jane's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, I think so. It should be fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. We made our excuses, me leaving the casserole untouched. But the incident stuck with me. It was a small victory in what felt like an ongoing battle, a battle where Jane held all the cards because she controlled the kitchen. I've learned to navigate this world with careful steps. Eating out is a strategic operation. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian place, a rare find that understood the gravity of food allergies. I'd recited my usual spiel to the waiter, who nodded understandingly. Alex watched me with those soft eyes of his, the ones that said he'd do anything to make my life easier. "You okay?" he asked, after the waiter left. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss," I replied, folding my napkin on my lap. "You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die," he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, a short, grateful sound. Well, when you put it that way. After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt light, happy. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her words were like a cloud over the moon, darkening the moment. "Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I read the text to Alex, who wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "She's just trying to get to you," he said. But as much as I wanted to shrug it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than just a jab. It was a warning, a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food, but to people like her, who saw it as a weakness to be exploited. The rest of the walk home, I couldn't help but think about all the close calls, all the accidental exposures, and how easily something could go wrong. It wasn't just the peanuts, or the soy, or the peas. It was the realization that my allergy was more than a personal battle. It was a chink in my armor that someone like Jane could see as an opportunity. And that thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house were always a production, like a play where everyone knew their parts except me. I was the wild card, the one who could unintentionally cause a scene with a single bite. Alex tried to make it better, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing in someone else's home court. One particular evening, the tension was as thick as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there, my own plate empty, waiting to figure out what I could eat without a trip to the hospital. "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine," Jane said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I eyed the beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I put my hand up, stopping Alex's reach. "I can't eat those, remember? Almonds are a no-go for me." Jane feigned surprise, a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex's chair scraped back as he stood up. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His voice was firm, edged with a frustration that made Jane's eyes narrow just a little. "I just wanted to make something nice," she said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives glanced around, forks paused midair, not sure where to look. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, embarrassed by the spotlight. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to break the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to be managed. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, like he was seeing me, but also seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. This particular evening, it was like a cloud had settled over him, and I knew it before he even said a word. "Mom thinks we should consider..." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. It's just... she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. I watched him, this man I loved, wrestling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No." He looked up, finally, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said, but as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. And I knew then that it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy came as a surprise, a happy one for Alex and me, a complicated one for everyone else. The day we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution as he gauged his mother's reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations, but I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes and agreed. The night of the dinner, the house was buzzing with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, floating from guest to guest with a grace that felt almost genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight, I hoped, would be different. The table was a feast, dishes upon dishes laid out, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up. You're eating for two now." I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, and met her gaze. There was a flicker of something there. Concern, or was it a challenge? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, and beneath it lay a trap, set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, and there was a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital, or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around the table was lively, filled with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane was at the head of the table, presiding over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. There was a round of hear, hear, and applause. I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that I knew could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hot, the walls inching closer with each passing minute. Then came the cake. It was a beautiful confection, layers of sponge and cream that made the room ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. I looked at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "I really shouldn't," I said, "but it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, his hand swift as he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. "I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it." The room erupted in chaos. Jane's face was the picture of shock, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flash of something there. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" he demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And in that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom, is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. "Of course not. I would never." Her voice trailed off, unconvincing. Mark wasn't having any of it. "I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut oil for cake. It was right there, in your handwriting," he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. The murmurs around the table grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up from the family. Alex was shaking his head, his hands balled into fists. "How could you, Mom? Liz could have died." I was frozen in my seat, the gravity of the situation anchoring me down. This wasn't just carelessness or forgetfulness, it was intentional. Jane's mask finally slipped, her face twisted in anger. "I didn't want it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak, and now she's bringing a child into this world who will be just like her." Alex took a step toward his mother, incredulous. "Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel?" I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to crumble under the weight of Jane's words. But I didn't. "Jane," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "you've made your feelings very clear. But this is not just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild." Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy family was shattered. All because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, filled with things unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. It's unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Relatives wanted to express their shock, their support, their apologies. And through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "Dad's left her. He can't get past what she did. He said it's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, sadness, pity? "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "He said she's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. And outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team, about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger, The scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. And as for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together.
I'm Sarah, and if you had told me that falling in love would lead me straight into a battlefield, I might have stayed single. But here we are, or rather, here I was, fresh into medical school, with dreams bigger than my budget. I had been studying at the college for a couple of years, living off ramen and coffee, and picking up night shifts at the local hospital to keep the lights on. Then, at a typical blowout student party, filled with too loud music and cheap beer, I met Tom. Tom was something else, polite, a bit too clean-cut for these parties, and always with a clever comment. He was studying law, and not just anywhere, but at one of those schools where his classmates were more likely to end up on TV than not. "Hey, I haven't seen you around before," I said, making my way through the crowd to where he was standing by the makeshift bar. He looked up, a bit surprised, then shot me a smile. "Just hiding from the chaos, Tom," he extended his hand, which I shook, feeling the firmness of his grip. "Sarah," I replied. "Med student by day, coffee zombie by night." He laughed. "Sounds intense. Law's a snooze fest compared to that." We hit it off instantly. Within weeks, Tom and I were a thing, and I was happy. I mean, really happy. Then came the day he wanted me to meet his folks. I should have seen the storm coming. His parents lived in one of those massive houses where you could play hide and seek and actually need to call for help to find each other. I remember standing at their door, decked out in the nicest dress I owned, which suddenly felt too plain. Tom's mom, Mrs. Waverly, opened the door, and her eyes did a quick scan from my head to my toes. The chill in her hello could have frosted a cake. "Mom, this is Sarah." "Sarah, my mother," Tom introduced us, unaware of the ice in the air. Mrs. Waverly forced a smile. "Pleasure. Come in." Dinner was like sitting in a court where I was both the accused and the only witness. The table was set like something out of a magazine, with more forks and knives than I knew what to do with. "So, Sarah, Tom tells us you're in medical school. That must be interesting," Mr. Waverly said, in a tone that suggested he found it anything but. "It is, sir. Every day's a new challenge," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Waverly joined in, her words sharp and quick. "And you work as well? A nurse, was it?" "Yes, at the city hospital. It's a good experience," I said, feeling my face heat up. She smirked. "Oh, a nurse. Well, we always need someone to clean up, don't we?" Mr. Waverly, meanwhile, had excused himself, mentioning something about needing to check on some work in his study. A convenient escape. The rest of the evening didn't improve. Mrs. Waverly's comments ranged from my family background, "So, your parents do, what exactly?" to my attire, "That dress is interesting. Where did you get it?" Each word was a barb, each glance a judgment. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her that I was more than my job, more than my clothes, more than the sum of my bank account. But I bit my tongue, for Tom's sake. As we drove home, the coldness of that night settled deep in my bones. I turned to Tom, trying to lighten the mood. "How about we just elope?" I half-joked, imagining a small, quiet wedding, just the two of us. Tom didn't laugh. He looked at me, dead serious. "Sarah, I want the big day, gala, guests, the whole 9 yards. We just gotta warm up to my parents a bit more, especially you." His words felt like a bucket of ice water. I nodded, hiding my disappointment. "Okay, we'll try it your way," I said, though my stomach knotted at the thought. Not a week later, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Waverly. "Sarah, darling, could you pop over this afternoon? I need a bit of help around the house." Her voice was sweet, which should have been my first warning. Something about her tone didn't sit right, but I agreed. I baked some cupcakes, chocolate, everyone's favorite, or so I thought, and dressed in my prettiest casual dress, hoping to make a better impression. When I arrived, the house loomed large and unfriendly, just like my memories of it. Mrs. Waverly met me at the door, not with a smile, but with a mop and a bucket. "Oh good, you're here. The housekeeper's sick, and we're in a dreadful state. You don't mind helping out, do you?" I stood there, cupcakes in hand, now holding a mop. No, of course not," I stammered, more out of shock than willingness. "Great. Start in the kitchen. And you can just leave those." She nodded disdainfully at my cupcakes. "In the trash. I don't eat that." My cheeks burned, but I swallowed the hurt. I wasn't going to let her see me upset. I moved to the kitchen and started scrubbing. The house was massive, and cleaning it felt like an endless task. As I worked, I could hear laughter from the pool area where Mrs. Waverly and her friends lounged. Hours later, hands raw and back aching, I called out, "Mrs. Waverly, I've finished. Is there anything else?" She sauntered in, inspecting my work with a hawk's eye, searching for any speck of dust to criticize. Finally, she had to concede. "Well, it does look spotless. You do know your way around a mop, Sarah. How about twice a week then?" I stared at her, mouth agape. I have my studies, night shifts at the hospital, and my thesis." Mrs. Waverly's face hardened. "Listen, dear, if you want to be part of this family, these are the hoops you jump through. Tom's waiting for us to get along. Don't disappoint him, or me." The threat was clear. Marry Tom, clean the house. Don't, and well, the alternative wasn't an option. "Okay," I muttered, defeated. Twice a week, I came, I cleaned, and each time, Mrs. Waverly found new ways to remind me of where I came from and where she thought I belonged. Twice a week, like clockwork, I scrubbed and cleaned Tom's family mansion. It wasn't what I signed up for when I imagined a life with him, but Mrs. Waverly seemed to have decided my role long before I even had a say. "You look just right with a mop, Sarah. It suits you better than a stethoscope ever will," she would taunt as she watched me from her perch, sipping her expensive tea. Nobody knew about this arrangement, not Tom, not his dad. Just me and Mrs. Waverly in this twisted secret of servitude. She never paid me. Instead, she paid with sharp jabs about my background, about how I was practically a charity case they had taken in. The year wore on, and between the cleaning, my intern shifts at the hospital, and my studies, my graduation project nearly suffered. But I powered through, fueled by the dream of the day I could finally call myself a doctor. Amid all this, wedding plans buzzed in the background. Mrs. Waverly took the reins, dictating everything from the napkin folds to the guest list. "We need to teach you how to not embarrass us," she declared one afternoon, enrolling me in an etiquette school. "You can't go around looking like a hillbilly at your own wedding." The etiquette classes were a whole new level of humiliation. The instructor, a stern woman named Mrs. Penrose, had no patience for my lack of sophistication. No. It's left hand on the lap, right hand for the fork. Have you never dined anywhere that didn't have plastic cutlery?" she chided during one of our sessions. "I'm trying my best," I muttered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks as I fumbled with the silverware again. Mrs. Penrose sighed, a sound of weary frustration. "Your best needs to get a lot better. This is basic, my dear." As if the etiquette lessons weren't enough, Mrs. Waverly's next project was dance lessons, and then, French lessons. "You'll sing a lovely French song at the wedding," she announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I can't even sing in English, Mrs. Waverly. And I really don't have time to learn French," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears. When I brought up these absurd demands to Tom, hoping for some support, he only tightened his lips and repeated the family mantra. "My mom's just looking out for us. You know how important this is. Just stick with it, okay?" I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. It wasn't just the cleaning or the classes, it was his inability to see how much I was struggling just to fit into this image his mother had crafted for me. I remember walking into the dance studio, my body aching from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, and meeting my dance instructor, a lively man named Marco who seemed to dance rather than walk. "Light on your feet, eh? Let's see what you've got," Marco chuckled, putting on some classical music. I tried to follow along, but my movements were clumsy, my mind too full of medical terminologies and French vocab I had crammed the night before. "Whoa, whoa, it's dancing, not wrestling," Marco laughed, stopping the music. "Relax, you're too stiff. Imagine you're floating." "Floating's hard when you feel like sinking," I admitted, half laughing at my own sad joke. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of the world seemed to press down on me. Etiquette, dancing, French, cleaning, each demand piling on top of the last until I felt I could barely breathe. The wedding was fast approaching, and the tension was as thick as the fancy curtains in Tom's family living room. Mrs. Waverly, always plotting, decided a bachelorette party was in order, a final hurrah before the big day, she said. I arrived at their house, dressed casually but elegantly, hoping to at least enjoy an evening without tasks or lessons. Mrs. Waverly greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, darling, so glad you could make it. Here, you must try some of this champagne, it's from Tom's father's collection." I hesitated. "Oh, I don't really drink," I murmured, trying not to make a scene. "Nonsense," she laughed, handing me a flute filled with bubbly liquid. "It's a celebration. Just one glass won't hurt." The room was filled with her friends, all elegantly dressed, their eyes sharp and calculating like birds of prey. Feeling the pressure, I took a small sip to appease her, intending to set the glass down and forget it. But the room started spinning soon after, and everything became a blur. I woke up suddenly to the harsh sensation of cold water splashing on my face. Mrs. Waverly stood over me, her expression twisted with fake concern that quickly shifted to scorn. "Look at you. Drunk and passed out. How disgraceful." I blinked, trying to orient myself. The room was still spinning, and I could hear murmurs and snickers around me. My eyes found Tom and his father, both staring down at a phone. Mr. Waverly's voice boomed. "This is outrageous. I knew she wasn't right for our family." "What's going on?" I managed to stammer, my voice hoarse, my mind racing to piece together the situation. Mr. Waverly, face red with anger, thrust the phone at me. The screen showed pictures of me, but not just any pictures. In them, I was sprawled on the couch, my clothing disheveled to reveal my underwear, a bottle of alcohol carelessly placed in my limp hand, and a cigarette dangling from my lips. My eyes were closed, head lolling in a way that screamed of a setup. I felt my heart sink. "I didn't do this," I whispered, looking up at them, my plea clear in my eyes. Tom looked from the phone to me, his expression torn. Mrs. Waverly cut in, her voice sharp. "Oh please, look at yourself. Do you expect us to believe you're innocent? This is who you really are, Sarah." "No, you've got to listen to me," I started, my voice gaining strength as I found my footing, despite the dizziness. "I didn't drink that much. Just one glass, and I didn't even want it. Something was in that drink, you did this." Mrs. Waverly feigned shock, her hand at her chest. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing? After all we've done for you, this is how you repay our kindness?" The room was thick with tension, the air almost suffocating as accusations flew. Standing there, soaked and humiliated, I knew I had to take control of the situation. "I'm going to the hospital," I declared, my voice steady, despite the chaos. "I'll donate blood for tests. If they find anything, any drug that shouldn't be there, I'm reporting this to the police." Mrs. Waverly's face drained of color, her usual composure slipping as the gravity of my words hit her. She glanced around, her eyes darting between the shocked faces of her guests and her family. "It was just a sleeping pill," she blurted out, the words spilling from her lips in a panicked rush. "I just wanted to lighten up the party. I didn't mean any harm." Tom's face was a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mom, how could you?" He turned to me, his eyes softening. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Please, let's not involve the police. Think about the family's reputation." I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the desperation in his eyes. It was always about the family's reputation, wasn't it? Never about what was right. I won't go to the police, I said slowly, but on one condition. What is it? Tom asked, relief flickering in his eyes. I'm not your family's cleaner. Not anymore. And I'm certainly not working for free. The silence that followed was heavy. Tom and Mr. Waverly exchanged looks of shock, clearly unaware of what I had been put through. Mrs. Waverly attempted to smile, her usual charm seeping through her facade. Let's not dwell on past misunderstandings. We were all preparing for the wedding, after all. I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. It's not a misunderstanding. For the past year, your wife has had me cleaning your house under the pretense that it was just helping out. I was never paid, and all the while, she pocketed the money meant for the cleaner. Mr. Waverly turned to his wife, his voice low and dangerous. Is this true, Helen? She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes avoiding mine. I thought it would be a good test of her character, she muttered. Test of her character? I echoed, incredulous. Is that what you call exploitation? Mr. Waverly's face was a mask of anger and embarrassment. He looked from his wife to me, the pieces falling into place. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I had no idea. Tom took my hand, his touch gentle. The wedding is still on if you want it. I'm sorry for all of this. Really sorry. I nodded, accepting his apology, but feeling the weight of his mother's gaze on me. As the room began to clear, Mrs. Waverly leaned in, her whisper harsh against my ear. I'll find a way to separate you two. This isn't over. On the day of my wedding, draped in a gown that made me feel like a princess out of a fairy tale, I was floating on air. Yet, every so often, Mrs. Waverly's thinly veiled threats echoed in my mind, casting long shadows over my joy. As we stood at the altar, Mrs. Waverly approached, her steps measured, her smile too sweet. Sarah, dear, it's time for your surprise. Remember? You promised to delight us with a little French song. Her voice was light, but her eyes glittered with mischief. I froze, the words hitting me like ice water. I'm not ready to sing, especially not in French, I whispered, turning towards Tom with a desperate look. Tom, caught in the middle of his mother's schemes and his own desire to keep the peace, seemed conflicted. He gave me a tight smile. Come on, Sarah, it's just a song. Let's not upset anyone. Do it for the family, for the guests. Reluctantly, I walked over to the DJ booth, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the murmur of the crowd. The DJ, a young guy with sympathetic eyes, leaned in as I approached. Your mother-in-law insisted on non-Jene regret rain. Tough song, even for the pros. My stomach nodded. She had set me up to fail, to humiliate me in front of everyone we cared about. But I wasn't going to let her have this victory. Not today. I had something else in mind, something she wouldn't see coming. As I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, Mrs. Waverly clapped her hands, drawing the attention of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's give Sarah our full attention. She's been practicing so hard. Her voice was saccharine sweet, laced with venom. Remember, no laughing too loudly. The crowd turned to me, expectant faces all around. I could feel their curiosity, their anticipation. Some were puzzled, wondering since when had I developed a talent for singing, let alone in French. As the music started, I held the microphone with a shaky hand, knowing that I wasn't about to sing. Instead, I had orchestrated a reveal that would expose the true colors of the woman who had tried to undermine me at every turn. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screen. I have something important to show you all, I announced, my voice echoing through the hall. The room hushed, the playful notes of the French song dying away as the projector flickered to life. Instead of the romantic vistas of France, the screen displayed a series of images and videos that captured Mrs. Waverly in intimate moments with the young pool cleaner. The gasps and murmurs swelled into a loud buzz as each new image made her deception clearer. Mrs. Waverley's face turned a deep shade of red, then white as she realized the extent of her exposure. She spun towards me, fury contorting her features. "You wretch! How dare you invade my privacy like this?" she shrieked, her composure breaking like thin ice underfoot. Tom was staring at the screen, his expression one of disbelief. When he finally spoke, his words were like daggers. "You've destroyed my family's reputation with your spite. You're just an ungrateful beggar. You should have appreciated what we were offering you." My heart felt heavy, but my resolve did not waver. "Tom," I replied, my voice clear and unwavering, "you can't destroy what never existed. Your family's reputation was a lie." With that, I took off my wedding veil, placed the microphone back on its stand, and picked up my bouquet from the table. I walked up to Tom, and with everyone watching, I threw the bouquet at his feet. I could never marry a man who refuses to stand by me, who can't see the truth for what it is. The room was in chaos, whispers turning into shouts as the implications of the scandal began to sink in. Mr. Waverley turned to his wife, his voice laced with disgust. "How could you do this to us? To our family?" Meanwhile, Mrs. Waverley, now completely unhinged, tried to salvage her dignity, but it was too late. The damage was done. "This is not the end, Sarah. I won't let it end like this," she hissed, her eyes darting around the room, looking for any ally in her downfall. But there were none. The guests were a mix of shocked and appalled, their faces reflecting a range of emotions from pity to disdain. The image of a united, respectable family had shattered, replaced by the reality of deceit and betrayal. As I walked out of the church, the weight of the dress felt lighter with each step, the cool air kissing my face with promises of new beginnings. Behind me, the sounds of a family unraveling filled the air, a poignant reminder of the bullet I had dodged. The aftermath was indeed tremendous. Mr. Waverley filed for divorce, and Mrs. Waverley found herself ostracized from the community she had once reigned over. Their family's business suffered as partners pulled out, unwilling to associate with scandal. Tom was left to deal with the fallout, his once unshakable belief in his family's integrity shattered. Years had passed since that fateful day at the altar, and I had since become a practicing surgeon, my days filled with long shifts and life-saving decisions. I had built a new life, one that was mine alone, shaped by my choices, not by deceit or manipulation. It was a typical day at the hospital when she came in, a patient, frail and barely recognizable, cloaked in tattered clothes, a stark contrast to the affluent attire I had once known her in. It took me a moment, but then the recognition hit. It was Mrs. Waverley, the mother of my ex-fiancé. She was wheeled into the emergency room, her face etched with lines of hardship and time, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and desperation. As the attending surgeon, it was my job to assess her condition. She needed surgery, urgently, but a quick check revealed she had no insurance, a fact that added yet another layer of complexity to the situation. "Dr. Sarah Thompson," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper as she recognized me. It was the first time she had addressed me without a sneer, and the irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. I need help. Tom, he's turned me away. I have nowhere else to go." "Mrs. Waverley," I started, keeping my voice professional, devoid of the emotions churning inside me. "You need surgery. But without insurance, it's complicated." She clasped her hands together, the once flashy rings she wore now absent, her fingers trembling. "Please, could you pay for it? Or at least do it for free? I'm begging you." Her plea was pathetic, a far cry from the commanding tone she once wielded like a weapon. I took a deep breath, the weight of her request heavy on my shoulders. This was more than just a medical decision, it was a moral crossroads. "Mrs. Waverley," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "I'm a surgeon, not a charity. You treated me horribly, manipulated your son against me, tried to ruin my life. You're not my responsibility. But I have nothing left," she countered weakly, the fight seemingly gone from her voice. "And whose fault is that?" I replied, my tone colder than I intended. "You made your choices, Mrs. Waverley. You chose to deceive, to scorn, to alienate. Now, you live with those choices. She looked at me, her eyes widening slightly as if seeing me for the first time. Not the young woman she could bully, but the doctor I had become, hardened by years of saving lives and surviving the cuts of both scalpel and scorn. I will ensure you get the minimal care required by law, I continued, turning away to hide the conflict inside me. But I won't pay for your surgery. I won't bend the rules for you. You need to make arrangements, or the state will. Leaving her in the care of the nursing staff, I walked out of the room, her soft sobs fading behind me. It was a harsh stance, perhaps, but life had taught me that mercy was a luxury sometimes, especially for those who had never shown any themselves.